Billionaire planned a festive date with his fiancée until his ex appeared at a bus stop with twins. Hello, it's a joy to have you here for another story. If you can, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin today's story. The cold came early that December evening, cutting through the streets of New York like a blade made of ice and silence. Christmas lights glittered along Fifth Avenue, casting golden halos on the frosted sidewalks. Carolers sang outside Rockefeller Center, their voices rising into the night sky with promises of peace and joy. The city pulsed with anticipation, the kind that only comes once a year, when strangers smile at each other and the world pretends for just a moment that everything might be all right. But 3 miles away, across the Brooklyn Bridge where the glamour faded into reality, the cold was different. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't festive, it was brutal. Amy Walker sat on a metal bench at a forgotten bus stop near Atlantic Avenue, her arms wrapped around 2 small bodies that shivered despite the threadbare coats she'd layered over them. Oliver pressed his face against her left shoulder. Emma clung to her right side, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of Amy's worn sweater, as if it were the only solid thing in the world. Amy's breath came out in visible clouds. Her lips were chapped and colorless. Her hands, once soft and careful, were now red and rough from years of work that broke the body before it built anything. But it was her eyes, those hazel eyes that once sparkled with hope, that told the real story. They were tired, haunted, empty in a way that no amount of sleep could ever fix. The bus was late. Again, she glanced down at the children. Oliver had fallen asleep against her, his mouth slightly open, his dark lashes resting against pale cheeks. Emma was still awake, staring at the Christmas lights across the street with a kind of quiet wonder that made Amy's chest ache. "Mama," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Are we going home tonight?" The word felt like a lie in Amy's mouth. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered back, kissing the top of Emma's head. "We're going home." The shelter they were staying at wasn't home. It was a roof, 4 walls, a cot shared between the 3 of them. But it was all she had, and she would make it enough. She always did. Across the street, a traffic light turned red. A sleek black Rolls-Royce came to a stop, its polished exterior reflecting the Christmas lights like a mirror. The windows were tinted, but through the front windshield Amy could see movement. 2 figures inside, bathed in soft amber light. She didn't mean to look. She had learned long ago not to stare at the world she no longer belonged to, but something made her eyes linger. And then the window rolled down, just an inch, just enough. Inside the car, Christopher Carter sat in the back seat, his hand resting over the delicate fingers of Jennifer Bell. She was radiant tonight, her blonde hair styled to perfection, her emerald dress cut with precision, her diamond necklace catching every flicker of light. She was laughing at something he'd said, leaning into him with practiced elegance. Christopher smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. It never did anymore. Jennifer squeezed his hand. "Are you ready for tonight?" she asked, her voice smooth and confident. "The announcement is going to be everywhere by morning. Carter and Bell, the merger of the decade." He nodded. Ready. But he wasn't thinking about the announcement. He wasn't thinking about the journalists waiting at the plaza, or the board members who'd flown in from London, or the champagne already chilling in crystal flutes. He was thinking about how empty he felt. The light was still red. Christopher glanced out the window absently, his gaze drifting across the street, and then it stopped, completely, frozen. There on the bench, beneath a flickering street lamp, sat a woman, thin, broken, holding 2 children who looked no older than 3. His heart stopped beating. It was her, Amy. The name echoed in his mind like a gunshot in an empty room. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. She was gone. She had left. She had. But it was her. The shape of her face. The way she held herself, even in defeat. The way her hair fell across her shoulder. And the children. Christopher's eyes locked onto them. The little boy with dark hair. The little girl with curls. Their faces were turned away, but he could see enough. Enough to know. They had his eyes. The same blue, the same shade, the same shape. His breath caught. The world outside the car seemed to tilt, the lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. "Christopher?" Jennifer's voice was distant, muffled. "Are you listening?" He didn't answer. His hand was already on the door handle. "Christopher?" The light turned green. The driver began to pull forward. "Stop!" Christopher said, his voice hoarse. "Sir?" the driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Stop the car." "Christopher, what are you—" "Stop the car!" The Rolls-Royce lurched to a halt in the middle of the intersection. Horns blared behind them. Jennifer grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with alarm. "What are you doing?" she hissed. But Christopher was already staring out the back window, his neck craned, his pulse hammering in his ears. The bench was empty. The bus had come. Amy and the children were gone. Christopher sat frozen, his hand still gripping the door handle, his knuckles white. Jennifer's voice was sharp now. "Christopher, we're going to be late." He didn't respond, because in that single, fleeting moment, the life he'd built, the empire, the reputation, the carefully constructed identity, had cracked wide open, and all he could see were two small faces, two children, his children. The driver cleared his throat. "Sir, should I—" "Drive," Jennifer ordered coldly. The car moved forward, but Christopher Carter didn't move at all. He sat in silence, his mind racing, his heart shattering in ways he didn't know were still possible, because he had just seen a ghost, and that ghost had been holding his entire world in her arms. Christopher Carter barely registered a word during the engagement announcement. The Plaza Hotel ballroom was a cathedral of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above polished marble floors. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, while waiters in white gloves glided between guests, carrying trays of champagne and caviar. Photographers lined the walls, their cameras flashing like lightning trapped in glass. Jennifer stood beside him on the small stage, her smile perfect and unwavering. She held his hand with just the right amount of affection, not too much, not too little. Everything about her was calculated, precise, flawless. And so it is with great joy that we announce the union of two of New York's most respected families, the Master of Ceremonies declared, his voice booming through the microphone. "Christopher Carter and Jennifer Bell." Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. Jennifer turned to him, her eyes expectant. He kissed her cheek. The cameras exploded with light, but Christopher felt nothing. His mind was 3 miles away at a bus stop in Brooklyn, watching a woman disappear into the night with 2 children, whose faces he would never forget. His children. The realization was a blade between his ribs. How was it possible? Amy had left him. She had vanished without explanation 4 years ago, right before graduation. He had searched for her, sent emails, made calls, even hired a private investigator, but every lead went cold. His father had told him the truth, hadn't he? That Amy had left the country with someone else, that she had never loved him, that it was all a lie. But those children... Christopher's jaw clenched. He could still see their faces in his mind. The little boy's dark hair, the little girl's delicate features, and their eyes. Those impossibly blue eyes. They were his. He knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. "Christopher." Jennifer's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. She was still smiling, but her eyes were cold, sharp. "You're not listening," she said softly, her lips barely moving. "I'm fine," he muttered. "You're not." She leaned closer, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "Pull yourself together. Everyone is watching." He forced a smile, raised his glass, said all the right things. But inside, he was drowning. Across the city, in a cramped room at the Haven Street shelter, Amy sat on the edge of a narrow cot, her arms wrapped around her knees. Oliver and Emma were finally asleep, curled together beneath a donated blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and mothballs. Their breathing was soft and even, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Amy stared at the wall, her mind replaying the moment over and over again. She had seen him, Christopher, after all these years, after all the silence, after convincing herself that he had forgotten her entirely. There he was, in a car that cost more than she would earn in a lifetime, with a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of Vogue. Amy closed her eyes, but the image wouldn't leave. She had known, of course. She had seen the headlines, the tabloids, the endless photos of Christopher Carter, billionaire heir, tech mogul, philanthropist, fiancé. His face was everywhere, in magazines, on billboards, on the news. She had stopped looking years ago. It hurt too much. But tonight, seeing him in person, so close she could have called his name, had ripped open wounds she thought had scarred over. Her hand moved instinctively to her chest, where a small locket hung on a tarnished chain. Inside was a photo, the only one she had kept. Christopher and her, laughing on the steps of the library during their sophomore year, his arm around her shoulders, her head tilted against his. They had been so young, so stupid, so in love. Amy opened the locket, staring at the faded image in the dim light. "I tried to tell you," she whispered to the photograph. "I tried so hard." The letter had been written on a rainy night in March, 4 years ago. Amy had been 3 months pregnant, alone in her dorm room, her hands shaking as she pressed the pen to paper. "Christopher, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you even care anymore, but I have to tell you, I'm pregnant, with twins. They're yours. I know you ended things and I don't understand why, but I need you to know that I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I loved you. I still do. Please, if there's any part of you that remembers what we had, call me. Come see me. Let me explain. I'm scared, Christopher. I don't know what to do. Please don't leave me alone in this." She had folded the letter carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and delivered it by hand to his father's office building. She had begged the receptionist, then the assistant, to make sure it reached him. "I promise," the assistant had said, taking the envelope with a sympathetic smile. "I'll make sure he gets it." But he never did. Amy waited for weeks, then months. But Christopher never called, never wrote, never came. She gave birth alone in a county hospital, holding 2 tiny, screaming miracles while nurses congratulated her and asked where the father was. "He doesn't know," she had whispered, tears streaming down her face, and it was the truth. Now, sitting in the shelter, Amy pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She had survived, somehow. She had cleaned houses, worked night shifts at diners, taken any job that would let her keep the children close. She had been evicted twice, gone hungry more times than she could count, but she had never, ever given up, because Oliver and Emma deserved better. They deserved a mother who fought. Even if their father never knew they existed. Amy reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Emma's forehead. The little girl stirred, but didn't wake. "I'm sorry," Amy whispered. "I'm so sorry you don't have what you deserve." Outside, snow began to fall, silent, cold, unforgiving. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Christopher Carter stood alone on his balcony, staring at the lights of Brooklyn in the distance. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't, because for the first time in 4 years he had seen the truth, and it had destroyed him. Christopher didn't go to work the next morning. For the first time in 7 years, he ignored the alarm, the emails, the conference calls scheduled back-to-back from dawn until midnight. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand, messages from Jennifer, from his assistant, from board members demanding answers about quarterly projections. He silenced it all. Instead, he stood in his walk-in closet, staring at a box he hadn't opened in years. It was shoved in the back corner, beneath tailored suits and Italian leather shoes, covered in a thin layer of dust. His hands shook as he pulled it down. Inside were relics of a life he'd tried to forget. A faded Columbia University sweatshirt, a ticket stub from a concert they'd gone to in Brooklyn, a photo booth strip showing 4 pictures of them laughing, kissing, making faces at the camera. And at the bottom, folded carefully, a single piece of notebook paper. Christopher unfolded it slowly. It was a note Amy had written during their junior year, slipped into his backpack during a study session. Her handwriting was loopy and uneven. The pen pressed hard into the paper. "You fell asleep again during macro. I covered for you with Professor Hastings. You owe me coffee. And a kiss. Maybe 2. Christopher pressed the note to his chest, his breathing unsteady. He had loved her, truly, deeply, in a way he hadn't loved anyone before or since. And then she was gone. He remembered the email his father had forced him to send. Cold, clinical, final. "Amy, this isn't working anymore. I think it's best if we go our separate ways. Please don't contact me again." He hadn't wanted to send it, but his father had been relentless, threatening, controlling. "She's not from our world, Christopher," his father had said, his voice like iron. "She'll drag you down, ruin everything we've built. End it. Now." Christopher had been weak, young, afraid, so he had obeyed, and he had spent the last 4 years hating himself for it. But now everything was different, because Amy hadn't disappeared into thin air. She had been 3 miles away, homeless, alone with his children. Christopher grabbed his coat and keys. He didn't bother with the Rolls-Royce. Instead, he took his personal car, a black Audi he rarely drove, and headed straight for Brooklyn. The Atlantic Avenue bus stop looked different in daylight, less tragic, more ordinary. Just another forgotten corner of the city where people waited for buses that were always late. Christopher parked across the street and got out, his breath visible in the cold December air. He walked to the bench where he'd seen her, running his hand along the cold metal as if it might still hold some trace of her presence. A woman in a heavy coat walked past, eyeing him suspiciously. "Excuse me," Christopher said quickly. "Do you know if there's a shelter near here?" The woman frowned. "Why?" "I'm looking for someone." She studied him for a long moment. His expensive coat, his polished shoes, the desperation in his eyes. "Haven Street," she said finally. 2 blocks south, but they don't let just anyone in. "Thank you." Christopher walked quickly, his heart pounding. The streets here were narrow and cracked, lined with old buildings covered in graffiti and faded advertisements. This wasn't the New York tourists saw. This was the city that survived in the margins. The Haven Street shelter was a squat brick building with barred windows and a single metal door. A handwritten sign taped to the glass read, "Intake hours, 9 a.m., 5 p.m., no walk-ins after dark." Christopher checked his watch. It was just past 10. He opened the door. Inside, the air was warm but stale, smelling of disinfectant and old coffee. A woman in her 50s sat behind a desk, cluttered with paperwork, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," Christopher said, his voice tight. "Her name is Amy Walker. She has 2 children, twins, a boy and a girl, about 3 years old." The woman's expression didn't change. "We don't give out information about our residents. Please, I just need to know if she's here." "Sir, I can't. I'm the father." The words came out raw, desperate. "I'm the father of those children. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. But I saw them last night, and I—" His voice faltered. "Please, just tell me if she's here." The woman studied him carefully. She had seen a lot of men come through these doors. Men looking for women they'd hurt. Men with excuses and apologies and promises they'd never keep. But something in this man's eyes was different. She sighed. "Wait here." She disappeared down a narrow hallway. Christopher stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. Minutes crawled by like hours. Finally, the woman returned. "She's not here anymore," she said softly. Christopher's stomach dropped. "Where did she go?" "She checked out this morning, didn't say where." "Did she leave any information? A phone number? An address?" "No, she never does." Christopher felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Never does? You mean she's been here before?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "She comes and goes, stays a few nights, then leaves. She doesn't like to take up space. Always worried about the other families." "How long has this been going on?" "A year, maybe more." Christopher's chest constricted. A year. She had been struggling for a year, and he had been 3 miles away, drinking champagne and attending galas and pretending his life had meaning. "If she comes back," he said, his voice breaking, "please, tell her Christopher was here. Tell her I need to see her. I need to—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Tell her I'm sorry." The woman's expression softened. She pulled out a business card and handed it to him. "Leave your number. If she comes back, I'll give it to her. But I can't make any promises." Christopher scribbled his personal cell number on the back of the card and handed it to her. "Thank you," he whispered. He walked out into the cold, his legs unsteady. Amy was gone, but she was out there, somewhere, and he was going to find her, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Amy stood in front of a small diner in Queens, staring at the Help Wanted sign taped to the window. Oliver tugged at her coat. "Mama, I'm hungry." Emma said nothing, but her eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, said everything. "I know, baby," Amy whispered, crouching down to their level. "Just give me a few more minutes, okay? I'm going to get us something." She pushed open the door. A bell chimed overhead. The smell of burnt coffee and fried eggs hit her immediately. The diner was nearly empty. Just a couple of truckers nursing mugs at the counter and an older man reading a newspaper in a corner booth. Behind the register stood a woman in her 60s, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, her face lined with years of hard living. "We're not hiring," she said, before Amy could even speak. Amy's stomach dropped. "The sign, old sign, forgot to take it down. Please." Amy's words came out in a rush. "I'll do anything. Washing dishes, cleaning tables, whatever you need. I can start right now." The woman looked her up and down, taking in the worn coat, the exhaustion etched into her face, the 2 small children clinging to her legs. "You got experience?" "Yes. 3 years at a diner in Manhattan. 2 years cleaning offices. I'm fast. I'm reliable. You got references?" Amy hesitated. Her last employer had fired her when she'd missed too many shifts, because Emma had been sick and she couldn't afford a babysitter. No one wanted to hire someone without childcare. No one wanted the liability. "No," Amy admitted softly, "but I promise—" "Can't help you." The woman turned away, dismissing her. Amy stood there for a moment, frozen, Then she took Oliver and Emma by the hands and walked out. The cold hit her like a slap. She led the children to a bus stop bench and sat down heavily, her head in her hands. "Mama," Oliver whispered. "Are you sad?" Amy forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Mama's just tired." But she wasn't tired. She was drowning. Christopher sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. He had spent the entire morning searching. Social media, public records, old university databases, anything that might tell him where Amy had gone. But there was nothing. No phone number, no address, no digital footprint at all. It was as if she had been erased. His assistant knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Carter, Miss Bell is here to see you." Christopher's jaw tightened. "Tell her I'm busy. She says it's urgent." Before he could respond, Jennifer pushed past the assistant and strode into the office, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Christopher," her voice was ice. "We need to talk." He didn't look up. "Not now, Jennifer." She slammed her purse down on his desk. "You missed 3 meetings yesterday, you didn't answer your phone, and now I hear you're asking questions about some homeless woman in Brooklyn?" Christopher's eyes snapped to hers. "Who told you that? Does it matter?" She crossed her arms. "What the hell is going on?" He stood slowly, his voice low and controlled. "That's none of your business." Jennifer laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "None of my business. We're engaged, Christopher. Everything you do is my business. We're not engaged anymore." The words hung in the air like a grenade. Jennifer froze. "Excuse me?" Christopher pulled open his desk drawer and removed the engagement ring he'd placed there that morning. He set it on the desk between them. "I can't marry you, Jennifer." Her face went white. "You're joking." "I'm not." "Because of her?" Jennifer's voice rose, sharp and venomous. "Because of some woman you saw on a street corner? Are you insane?" "She has my children." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her perfectly composed mask finally cracking. "What?" she whispered. "Twins. A boy and a girl. They're 3 years old." "I didn't know, Jennifer. I swear I didn't know, but I saw them and—" His words caught. "They're mine." Jennifer took a step back, her hand pressed to her chest as if she'd been physically struck. "You had children," she said slowly, "with another woman, and you didn't know. She tried to tell me. My father—" He stopped, his fists clenched. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that they're out there, alone, struggling, and I need to find them." "So you're just going to throw everything away?" Jennifer's voice shook now. "Your career, your reputation, our future, for a woman you haven't seen in 4 years and 2 children you've never met?" Christopher looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw her clearly. She wasn't cruel, she wasn't evil, but she was empty, and so was he when he was with her. "Yes," he said simply. Jennifer grabbed the ring off the desk and threw it at him. It bounced off his chest and clattered to the floor. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "My father will destroy you. The board will destroy you. You'll have nothing." "I already have nothing," Christopher said softly. Jennifer stared at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, not of sadness but of fury. Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Christopher stood alone in the silence. He picked up the ring from the floor and placed it back in the drawer. Then he grabbed his coat and left the office. He didn't know where Amy was, but he knew someone who might, his father. The Carter estate sat on 10 acres in upstate New York, surrounded by iron gates and centuries-old trees. Christopher hadn't visited in 6 months. He hadn't wanted to. But now, as he pulled up the long driveway, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Rage. His father was in the library, sitting in a leather chair by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Christopher." His father's voice was calm, measured. "This is unexpected." Christopher didn't sit. He stood in the doorway, his hands shaking. "Where is the letter?" he said quietly. His father raised an eyebrow. "What letter?" "The letter Amy sent me, 4 years ago." "Where is it?" His father took a slow sip of his drink. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." His father set the glass down. "Watch your tone." "She was pregnant," Christopher's words exploded out. "She tried to tell me, and you stopped her. You intercepted the letter. You lied to me. You told me she left. You told me she didn't love me." His father stood, his face hard as stone. "I did what was necessary." "Necessary?" Christopher took a step forward, his voice rising. "She had my children, and because of you, I lost 4 years. 4 years I'll never get back." "You would have thrown your life away for her," his father said coldly. A girl with no family, no money, no prospects. She would have dragged you down. She was the only real thing I ever had. His father's expression didn't change. You'll thank me one day. Christopher stared at him, this man who had raised him, shaped him, controlled him, and he realized with perfect clarity that he didn't know him at all. Stay away from me, Christopher said, his voice barely above a whisper. Stay away from them. If you ever come near my family again, I will destroy everything you've built. He turned and walked out, and for the first time in his life, he didn't look back. Christopher drove back to Manhattan in silence, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The confrontation with his father had left him hollowed out, but also strangely free. For years he had lived under the weight of expectations, what the family needed, what the company required, what society expected. But now none of it mattered. Only one thing mattered: finding Amy. He parked outside his penthouse and took the elevator up, his mind racing. If his father had intercepted the letter 4 years ago, it had to be somewhere. His father never threw anything away. He kept records of everything: contracts, emails, documents, anything that might one day prove useful. Christopher pulled out his phone and dialed his attorney. Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Quietly, of course. What do you need? Access to my father's private files, everything from 4 years ago. Correspondence, intercepted mail, anything addressed to me that never made it through. There was a pause. Christopher, I don't care if it's legal or not. Find a way. Another pause, then, I'll see what I can do. Christopher hung up and collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. He was so close. He could feel it. But Amy was still out there, somewhere in the city, believing he had abandoned her. Amy sat on the floor of a small public library in Queens, Oliver and Emma curled up beside her on a worn carpet. The library was warm, safe, free. It was the only place she could take the children where they didn't have to worry about being asked to leave. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Zhao, had grown familiar with them over the past few weeks. She never asked questions. She just smiled and pointed them toward the children's section. Emma was flipping through a picture book about animals, her small fingers tracing the illustrations. Oliver had fallen asleep against Amy's shoulder, his breathing soft and even. Amy stared at the ceiling, her mind far away. She kept thinking about the night before, about the car, about Christopher's face through the window. Had he seen her? Had he recognized her? Or had she imagined the whole thing, her exhausted mind playing tricks on her? It didn't matter. Even if he had seen her, what would he do? He was engaged, happy, living a life she could never be part of, and she had made peace with that, or at least she had tried to. Amy pulled out her phone, a cheap prepaid model with a cracked screen, and opened the only photo she had saved. It was from 4 years ago, taken on her last day at Columbia. She was standing in front of the library steps, her graduation gown draped over her arm, her belly just starting to show. She had been so scared that day, terrified of what was coming, but also filled with a strange, stubborn hope. He'll come back, she had told herself. When he finds out, he'll come back. But he never did. Amy closed the photo and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Mama? Emma's small voice broke through her thoughts. Yes, sweetheart. Can we go home soon? Amy's chest ached. Home, that word again. Soon, she whispered, kissing the top of Emma's head. I promise. 2 days later, Christopher's phone rang. Marcus? I found it. Christopher's heart stopped. The letter. Not the original, but a scan. Your father kept a digital copy in his private server. I'm sending it to you now. Christopher's hands shook as he opened his email. The attachment loaded slowly. An image file, grainy and faded. And then he saw it. Amy's handwriting. Unmistakable. The loops and curves he used to find slipped into his notebooks, left on sticky notes in his apartment, written in the margins of textbooks they shared. He read the letter once, then again, then a third time, his vision blurring. Christopher, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you even care anymore, but I have to tell you, I'm pregnant, with twins. They're yours. I know you ended things and I don't understand why, but I need you to know that I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I loved you. I still do. Please. If there's any part of you that remembers what we had, call me. Come see me. Let me explain. I'm scared, Christopher. I don't know what to do. Please don't leave me alone in this. Amy. At the bottom, in his father's handwriting, was a single word. Disposed. Christopher let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She had tried. She had reached out. She had begged him for help, and his father had buried it. He grabbed his coat and keys and ran out of the apartment, his phone pressed to his ear. Marcus, I need you to find her. Amy Walker. Use every resource we have. Private investigators, data analysts. I don't care what it costs. Find her. Christopher, that could take... Find her. He hung up and got into his car, driving aimlessly through the city. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't sit still. Hours passed. The sun set. The city lights came on. And then, by chance or fate, he saw it. A small figure standing outside a bodega in the Bronx, holding two children by the hands. Christopher slammed on the brakes, pulling over so fast the car behind him honked angrily. He got out, his heart pounding, and crossed the street. Amy? She turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The children stared up at him with wide, curious eyes. Christopher, Amy breathed, her voice barely audible. He took a step closer, then another. I got the letter, he said, his words tumbling out. I just found it. 2 days ago. I swear, Amy, I didn't know. I didn't... Stop. Her voice was sharp, shaking. Don't. Amy, please, you don't get to do this. Tears streamed down her face. You don't get to show up 4 years later and... I never got the letter. His voice broke, desperate. My father intercepted it. He lied to me. He told me you left. I looked for you, Amy. I swear to God I looked. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. Oliver tugged at her coat. Mama, who is he? Amy closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Christopher dropped to his knees in front of the children, his hands shaking. Hi, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. My name is Christopher. Emma tilted her head. Are you a friend of Mama's? Christopher looked up at Amy, his eyes pleading. Amy's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head. I can't, she whispered. I can't do this. She grabbed the children's hands and turned to walk away. Amy, wait. But she was already gone, disappearing into the crowd. Christopher stood frozen on the sidewalk, the world spinning around him. He had found her, but he had lost her all over again. Amy didn't stop walking until her legs gave out. She collapsed onto a bench 3 blocks away, her chest heaving, tears blurring her vision. Oliver and Emma stood in front of her, their faces pale with confusion. Mama, why are you crying? Emma whispered. Amy pulled them both into her arms, holding them so tightly they squirmed. I'm okay, she lied, her voice muffled against their hair. Mama's okay. But she wasn't okay, she was breaking. Seeing Christopher again, hearing his voice, seeing the desperation in his eyes, had ripped open every wound she'd spent 4 years trying to close. She had built walls around her heart brick by brick, convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she could do this alone. But the truth was, she had never stopped loving him, and that terrified her, because love had nearly destroyed her once, and she couldn't survive it again. Christopher stood outside the bodega long after Amy disappeared, his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold night air. He felt like he was drowning. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. I found her, Christopher said softly. That's great. Where? She doesn't want to see me. There was a pause. Christopher. She walked away. She wouldn't even let me explain. Give her time. She's been through hell. You can't expect... I know. Christopher closed his eyes. I know, but I don't know how much time I have. She's homeless, Marcus. She's living on the streets with 2 3-year-olds. Every day I'm not helping her is another day they're suffering. Then help her. Even if she doesn't want to see you, find out where she's staying, make sure she has food, shelter, whatever she needs. Christopher nodded slowly. I need you to do something else. What? I want to set up a trust fund for the children and a bank account in Amy's name, enough to get her back on her feet. How much are we talking? Whatever it takes. Marcus exhaled. Christopher, you need to be careful. If Jennifer or your father find out, I don't care what they think anymore. Just do it. He hung up and stared at the spot where Amy had been standing. She had looked so tired, so worn down, but she was still the same woman he had fallen in love with, still fierce, still proud, still unwilling to ask for help, and that was exactly what made this so impossible, because Amy Walker didn't want to be saved. She wanted to survive on her own terms. The next morning, Amy took the children to a community center in the Bronx that offered free breakfast for families in need. The room was crowded and loud, filled with the sounds of crying babies and clattering dishes. Amy sat at a corner table, watching Oliver and Emma eat scrambled eggs and toast with a hunger that made her chest ache. She hadn't eaten. She never did, until the children were full. A woman in her 40s sat down across from her, balancing a tray and a toddler on her hip. "First time here?" the woman asked. Amy nodded. "It's a good place, they don't judge, and the food's decent." She paused. "I'm Maria." "Amy." They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the room swirling around them. "How long have you been on the streets?" Maria asked gently. Amy hesitated. "A year, maybe more. I lose track." Maria nodded knowingly. "I've been there. Lost my job, lost my apartment. Took me 2 years to get back on my feet." "How did you do it?" "Applied for assistance. Found a shelter with a job training program. It's not easy, but..." She paused. "You can't do it alone. That's the hardest part. Learning to ask for help." Amy looked down at her hands. "I'm not very good at that. None of us are." Maria smiled sadly. "But your kids need you strong, and you can't be strong if you're carrying everything by yourself." Amy's chest tightened. She wanted to believe that, but every time she'd asked for help, every time she'd trusted someone, it had ended in disappointment. Except once, with Christopher, and look how that had turned out. That afternoon, Amy returned to the Haven Street shelter. The woman at the desk looked up and smiled. "Amy, good to see you back. Is there space tonight? For you and the kids?" "Always." Amy nodded gratefully. "Thank you." The woman hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a business card. "Someone came by looking for you," she said softly. Amy froze. "Who?" "A man. Tall. Well-dressed. Said his name was Christopher." She slid the card across the desk. "He left his number. Asked me to give it to you if you came back." Amy stared at the card as if it were a live grenade. "He seemed genuine," the woman added. "Desperate even. Said he needed to talk to you." Amy picked up the card slowly. The paper felt heavy in her hand. "Christopher Carter Personal Line, 917 55555 XXXXX." She turned it over. On the back, written in his familiar handwriting, were 3 words. "Please, just listen." Amy's hands shook. She shoved the card into her pocket and turned away. "I need to get the kids settled," she said quickly. "Of course." Amy walked down the hallway to the small room they'd been assigned, Oliver and Emma trailing behind her. Once inside, she locked the door and sat on the edge of the cot, pulling the card out again. She stared at it for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over the keypad. "Just listen," the card said. But what if listening broke her all over again? What if he promised things he couldn't deliver? What if he tried to take the children? What if... Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Amy, it's Christopher. I know you don't want to talk to me. I understand, but please let me help. You don't have to see me. You don't have to forgive me. Just let me make sure you and the kids are safe. Please." Amy's vision blurred. Another text came through. "I found the letter. I know what my father did. I know what I missed, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Amy covered her mouth with her hand, silent sobs shaking her body. Oliver climbed onto the cot beside her. "Mama, don't be sad." She pulled him close, burying her face in his hair. "I'm not sad, baby," she whispered. "I'm just tired." But that wasn't true. She wasn't tired. She was terrified, because for the first time in 4 years, she was starting to hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Across the city, Christopher sat in his apartment staring at his phone. No response. He hadn't expected one. But still, the silence hurt. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the glittering skyline. Somewhere out there, Amy was trying to survive, and he was going to make sure she didn't have to do it alone, even if she never forgave him, even if she never let him back in. He would spend the rest of his life making up for the years he'd lost, starting tonight. 3 days passed. Christopher didn't hear from Amy, but he kept his promise. Every morning he wired money to the Haven Street shelter under an anonymous donation, earmarked specifically for families with young children. He arranged for a local grocery store to deliver fresh food to the shelter daily. He hired a private security firm to monitor the area discreetly, ensuring Amy and the children were safe. He did all of this from the shadows, never once asking for credit or acknowledgement, because it wasn't about him, it was about them. Meanwhile, his life began to unravel in other ways. The board of Carter Enterprises called an emergency meeting. Jennifer's father, a major shareholder, demanded Christopher's resignation. The tabloids caught wind of the broken engagement, spinning wild stories about secret affairs and corporate scandal. Christopher's assistant quit. His lawyers warned him about hostile takeover attempts. His father released a public statement disowning him entirely, and Christopher didn't care about any of it. He had spent his entire life building an empire that meant nothing. Now, he was ready to burn it all down for the only thing that mattered. Amy sat in the small room at the shelter, staring at her phone. She had read Christopher's messages dozens of times. Each word was careful, sincere, desperate, but words were easy. Actions were harder. Still, she couldn't deny what she'd noticed over the past few days. The shelter had better food. The staff seemed less stressed. There were new blankets, new toys in the children's area, even a small Christmas tree in the common room. When Amy asked about it, the woman at the desk just smiled. "We had a generous donor," she said, anonymous, but very specific about how the money should be used. Amy's chest constricted. She knew exactly who it was. That night, after Oliver and Emma were asleep, Amy finally picked up her phone and typed a single word. Why? She hit send before she could change her mind. The response came almost immediately. "Because you deserve better. Because they deserve better. Because I should have been there 4 years ago and I can't change that. But I can be here now." Amy's hands shook. "I don't need your money. I know. But let me help anyway. Please." She stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face. "What do you want from me, Christopher?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally his response came through. "Just a chance to meet them. That's all. You don't have to forgive me. You don't have to let me into your life, but please, let me meet my children." Amy set the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. She had known this moment was coming, had dreaded it, because once she opened that door, everything would change. Oliver and Emma had never asked about their father. They were too young to understand. But one day they would, and when they did, what would she tell them? That she had kept him away, that she had been too afraid, too angry, too proud. Amy looked over at the cot where her children slept, their small bodies curled together beneath a donated blanket. They deserved to know their father, even if it terrified her. She picked up the phone and typed slowly, "1 meeting. That's all I'm promising." 2 days later, Amy stood outside a small cafe in Brooklyn, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Oliver and Emma held her hands, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Where are we going, Mama?" Oliver asked. "We're meeting someone," Amy said softly. "Who?" She swallowed. "Someone important." The cafe was warm and quiet, with soft music playing in the background. Amy spotted Christopher immediately. He sat at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug, his eyes fixed on the door. When he saw them, he stood so quickly he nearly knocked his chair over. Amy's breath caught. He looked different than she remembered, older, exhausted. But his eyes, those blue eyes that Emma and Oliver had inherited, were exactly the same. "Amy," he breathed. She nodded, unable to speak. Christopher's gaze dropped to the children, and his entire face transformed. His expression crumbled, tears streaming down his cheeks before he could stop them. "Oliver," he whispered. "Emma." Emma hid behind Amy's leg. Oliver stared at him with open curiosity. "Who are you?" Oliver asked. Christopher knelt down slowly, bringing himself to their level. His words came out unsteady. "My name is Christopher," he said softly, "and I'm your father." Emma peeked out from behind Amy. "Our father?" "Yes." "Where have you been?" Oliver asked, his voice small. The question hit Christopher like a physical blow. He looked up at Amy, his eyes pleading for guidance. Amy took a shaky breath. "He didn't know about you," she said softly. "But he knows now." Oliver frowned, processing this. Then he walked forward and stood directly in front of Christopher, studying his face carefully. "You have my eyes," Oliver said. Christopher let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I do." Or, "You have mine." Emma stepped forward too, emboldened by her brother's bravery. She reached out and touched Christopher's face gently, as if confirming he was real. "Are you going to stay?" she whispered. Christopher's tears fell freely now. He looked at Amy, his expression raw and vulnerable. "If your mother will let me," he said. "I want to stay, more than anything." Amy's vision blurred. She turned away, trying to hold herself together. Christopher stood slowly, never taking his eyes off the children. "Can I?" His words caught. "Can I hug them?" Amy hesitated, then nodded. Christopher dropped to his knees again and opened his arms. Oliver and Emma looked at each other, some silent twin communication passing between them. Then together, they walked into his embrace. Christopher wrapped his arms around them, holding them as if they were the most precious things in the world. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into their hair. "I'm so sorry." Amy watched from a few feet away, her hand pressed to her mouth. This was what she had been afraid of. Not that Christopher would reject them, but that he would love them, that he would be everything she'd hoped he would be. Because if he was real, if this was real, then she would have to face the truth she'd been running from for 4 years. She had never stopped loving him either, and that changed everything. An hour later, they sat at the table together. Christopher had bought hot chocolate for the children and pastries that Emma devoured with delight. Oliver sat on Christopher's lap, chattering about his favorite dinosaurs. Emma was showing him a drawing she'd made at the shelter, and Amy sat across from them, watching the man she had once loved become a father right before her eyes. "Thank you," Christopher said softly, looking at her over the children's heads. "For this, for letting me meet them." Amy nodded, her chest tight. "I know I have no right to ask for more," he continued, "but I want to be in their lives, however you'll let me. I don't care if it's 1 hour a week or—" "Christopher," Amy's voice was soft but firm. "We need to talk, really talk. But not here, not in front of them." He nodded immediately. "Whenever you're ready." Amy looked at her children, so happy, so unaware of how complicated everything was. "Tomorrow," she said. "We'll talk tomorrow." Christopher's eyes filled with hope. Okay. Tomorrow she would tell him the whole truth, about the nights she'd spent crying, about the jobs she'd lost, about the fear that never went away. But tonight, she would let her children have their father, even if, just for a little while. They met the next evening at a park near the shelter. Christopher had arranged for a trusted babysitter, a warm woman named Rosa who worked at a nearby community center, to watch Oliver and Emma for a few hours. Amy had been hesitant at first, but Rosa's gentle demeanor and the children's immediate comfort with her had eased her fears. Now, Amy sat on a bench overlooking a small frozen pond, her hands buried in her coat pockets. Christopher sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long time neither spoke. The sky was grey, heavy with the promise of snow. The park was nearly empty, just a few joggers and a man walking his dog in the distance. Finally, Christopher broke the silence. "I don't know where to start," he said softly. Amy stared at the pond. "Tell me what happened. After you sent that email. The real story." Christopher exhaled slowly. "My father found out about us. I don't know how. Maybe he'd been watching me. Maybe someone at the university tipped him off, but he called me into his office and told me I had to end it. He said you were using me, that you'd trap me with a pregnancy or ruin my reputation. He said if I didn't cut ties immediately, he'd destroy your scholarship, your future, everything." Amy's jaw tightened. "So you believed him?" "No." Christopher's voice was firm. "I didn't believe him, but I was 22 years old and terrified. He controlled everything. My trust fund, my position in the company, even where I lived. He made me write that email while he stood over my shoulder, and then he blocked your number from my phone, changed my email password, monitored everything. You could have fought back. I should have." His words came out raw. "I should have fought harder. I should have trusted you. But by the time I found the courage to defy him, you were already gone. I went to your dorm. They said you'd dropped out. I called your parents. They wouldn't tell me where you were. I hired a private investigator, but every lead went cold." Amy closed her eyes. "I was already pregnant by then. 3 months. I couldn't stay at school. I couldn't afford it. And I couldn't face you after that email." "The letter," Christopher said softly. "When did you write it?" "March. When I found out it was twins. I thought—" Her words broke. "I thought if you knew, you'd come back. That maybe your father had forced you to send that email, but if you knew about the babies, you'd find a way. I never got it. I know that now." They sat in silence again, the weight of 4 lost years pressing down on them. "What was it like?" Christopher asked, his voice barely audible. "The pregnancy, the birth, all of it." Amy's hands shook in her pockets. "Terrifying. I was alone. My parents had passed away the year before in a car accident. I never told you because I didn't want you to pity me. I had no siblings, no family. I worked until I couldn't anymore. Then I gave birth in a county hospital with nurses I'd never met. They put the babies in my arms and asked where the father was, and I just—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I lied. I said he was deployed overseas. It was easier than the truth." Christopher turned to look at her, his eyes red. "Amy, the first year was the hardest," she continued, her voice hollow. "I couldn't afford childcare, so I could only work night shifts when the shelter had evening care. I'd come back at dawn, exhausted, and Oliver and Emma would be awake, crying, needing me. I survived on 3 hours of sleep. I rationed formula. I wore the same clothes for weeks because I couldn't afford a laundromat. Why didn't you reach out again? To me, to anyone? Pride. Amy's laugh was bitter. Stupid, stubborn pride. I thought if you really cared, you'd find me. And when you didn't, I convinced myself I could do it alone, that I didn't need anyone. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. But the truth is, I was drowning. Every single day, I was drowning. And I didn't know how to ask for help. Christopher reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers. Can I? Amy pulled her hand away. Don't. Not yet. He nodded, withdrawing. I need you to understand something, Amy said, her voice steady despite the tears. I don't blame you for what your father did, but I do blame you for giving up, for believing I could just disappear, for not fighting harder. You're right. And I need to know. Her words faltered. I need to know this isn't just guilt, that you're not here because you feel obligated or because you want to fix your conscience, because if that's what this is, I'd rather you walk away now. Oliver and Emma deserve more than a father who's here out of duty. Christopher turned to face her fully, his expression raw and unguarded. I loved you, he said, his voice shaking. 4 years ago, I loved you more than I'd ever loved anyone, and I never stopped, even when I thought you'd left me. Even when I was with Jennifer. Even when I tried to convince myself I'd moved on. I never stopped loving you. Amy's breath hitched. But this isn't about us, Christopher continued. Not anymore. This is about Oliver and Emma. And I swear to you, Amy, I'm not here out of obligation. I'm here because the moment I saw them, something inside me clicked into place. They're my children, and I will spend the rest of my life being the father they deserve, whether you ever forgive me or not. Amy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It's not that simple. I know. You can't just walk into their lives and play hero. They need consistency, stability, things I've barely been able to give them. Then let me help you give them that. How? Amy's voice rose. You live in a penthouse, I live in a shelter. You run a billion-dollar company. I can't even afford groceries. We exist in completely different worlds, Christopher. How is this supposed to work? I don't know, he admitted, but I want to try, and I'm not asking you to forgive me today or tomorrow or ever. I'm just asking you to let me be their father. Let me help. Let me be there for them. For you, if you'll let me. Amy stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. I can't think about this right now, she said, her voice shaking. I need time. Christopher stood too. Okay, take all the time you need. She turned to leave, then stopped. Christopher? Yeah? Thank you for the donations, for the food, for everything you've been doing. He nodded. You don't have to thank me. Amy looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she walked away, leaving Christopher standing alone in the empty park as the first snowflakes began to fall. Amy returned to the shelter that night to find chaos. Police cars lined the street, their lights flashing red and blue against the darkened buildings. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, residents in various states of distress, some crying, others shouting at the officers. Amy's heart stopped. She pushed through the crowd, panic rising in her chest. What happened? Where are the children? A shelter worker she recognized grabbed her arm. Amy, thank God, the kids are fine. Rosa has them in the community center next door. What's going on? Fire inspection, the worker said grimly. Building's been condemned. Faulty wiring, structural damage, they're shutting us down. Everyone has to be out by morning. Amy felt the world tilt beneath her feet. What? No, they can't. I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do. Amy stumbled backward, her mind racing. The shelter had been her anchor, the one stable place she could return to, and now it was gone. She ran to the community center, her chest tight with fear. Inside, she found Rosa sitting on the floor with Oliver and Emma, reading them a picture book. The children looked up when Amy burst through the door. Mama! Emma jumped up and ran to her. Amy scooped her up, then pulled Oliver close, holding them both as tightly as she could. Are you okay? Rosa asked gently. Amy nodded, unable to speak. I heard about the shelter, Rosa continued. Do you have somewhere to go? Amy shook her head. Rosa's expression softened with sympathy. There's another shelter in Queens. I can call them, but they're usually full this time of year. It might be a few days before... I'll figure it out, Amy said quickly, her voice hollow. Thank you for watching them. Rosa hesitated. Amy, if you need help, I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. She was falling apart. Amy walked the streets for hours that night, Oliver and Emma bundled against her, half asleep on their feet. She tried 3 other shelters. All were full. She called the few contacts she had, former co-workers, acquaintances, but no one had space for a woman and 2 children. By midnight, Amy found herself standing outside a 24-hour diner in the Bronx, staring at the payphone on the wall. She pulled out the crumpled business card from her pocket. Christopher Carter Personal Line, 9-17, 555-XXXX. Her hand shook as she lifted the receiver. She dialed. It rang once, twice, then his voice, rough with sleep. "Hello?" Amy's words stuck in her throat. "Hello?" Christopher said again. "Amy, is that you?" Her voice cracked. "I need help." There was a pause. Then, "Where are you?" "I don't know. Somewhere in the Bronx, a diner. The shelter was condemned and She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have anywhere to go. Send me your location. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Christopher, send it now." The line went dead. Amy stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Then she hung up and pulled out her phone, sending him the address with trembling fingers. Oliver tugged at her coat. "Mama, I'm tired." "I know, baby. Just a little longer." She led them inside the diner and sat in a corner booth, ordering 2 glasses of water she couldn't afford to pay for. They waited. Christopher arrived in 18 minutes. He burst through the diner door, his hair disheveled, his coat thrown on over pajama pants and a t-shirt. His eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on Amy. He crossed to the booth in 3 strides. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice urgent. Amy shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. Christopher crouched down beside the table, his gaze moving to the children. Oliver was asleep, his head resting on the table. Emma's eyes were half closed, her small hand clutching Amy's sleeve. "What happened?" Christopher asked gently. "The shelter was condemned," Amy whispered. "I tried to find another place, but everywhere is full. I didn't know what else to do." Christopher's jaw tightened. Then he stood and pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Amy asked. "Calling my lawyer. I'm getting you a hotel room." "No," Amy's voice was sharp. "I don't want your charity." Christopher looked at her, his expression pained but resolute. "Amy, your children are exhausted. It's 1 in the morning. This isn't about pride anymore. Let me help." "I can't keep relying on you." "You're not relying on me. You're accepting help. There's a difference." Amy stared at him, her walls crumbling. She was so tired, so desperately tired. "Just for tonight," she whispered. Christopher nodded. "Just for tonight." 30 minutes later, they stood in a suite at a modest but clean hotel in Brooklyn. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchenette, and windows overlooking the city. To Amy, it looked like a palace. Christopher set Oliver down gently on one of the beds. The little boy didn't even stir. Emma was already asleep in Amy's arms. Amy laid Emma down beside her brother, pulling the blanket over them both. When she turned around, Christopher was watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," Amy said softly. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." They stood in silence for a moment. "You should get some sleep," Christopher said. "I'll be in the other room if you need anything." Amy frowned. "You're staying?" "I'm not leaving you alone. Not tonight." "Christopher, please." His voice was gentle but firm. "Just let me stay. I'll sleep on the couch. I won't bother you." "But I need to know you're safe." Amy wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to leave, to stop inserting himself into her life. But the truth was, she didn't want to be alone. "Okay," she whispered. Christopher nodded and turned to leave. "Christopher." He stopped. "I'm sorry," Amy said, her voice breaking, "for calling you, for needing you, for—" "Don't." He turned back to face her. "Don't apologize for needing help. You've been carrying this alone for too long." Amy's vision blurred with tears. Christopher took a step toward her, then stopped as if remembering the boundaries she'd set. "Get some rest," he said softly. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Amy collapsed onto the other bed, her body shaking with silent sobs. She had fought so hard to stay independent, to prove she didn't need anyone. But tonight, her armor had finally shattered, and the terrifying truth was, she did need him. She needed him desperately, and that changed everything. In the next room, Christopher sat on the couch, his head in his hands. He had spent years building an empire, accumulating wealth and power. But none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was in the next room, finally safe, finally resting. And he would do whatever it took to make sure they never had to suffer like this again, even if it cost him everything. Amy woke to the smell of coffee and pancakes. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The condemned shelter, the desperate phone call, Christopher's arrival in the middle of the night. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. Oliver and Emma were still asleep beside her, their faces peaceful in the morning light streaming through the window. Amy slipped out of bed and opened the door to the main room. Christopher stood at the small kitchenette, flipping pancakes on a portable griddle he must have ordered. He was still wearing the same clothes from last night, his hair messy, dark circles under his eyes. He looked up when he heard her. "Morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't." Amy crossed her arms, suddenly self-conscious. "Where did all this come from? Had it delivered? I figured the kids would be hungry." He paused. "You too." Amy's chest tightened. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." He plated a stack of pancakes and set them on the small table. "But I wanted to." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Amy," Christopher said quietly, "we need to talk about what happens next." "I know. Sit, please." Amy sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug he placed in front of her. Christopher sat across from her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he began, "about everything, about what you said in the park, and you're right. I can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. But I also can't stand by and watch you struggle when I have the resources to help." "Christopher, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to move in with me. I'm not asking you to be with me. What I'm offering is this. I have an apartment building in Brooklyn, small units, mostly young families. There's a vacancy on the 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, close to good schools. I want you and the kids to live there, rent-free." Amy's eyes widened. "I can't accept that." "Yes, you can." "No, Amy, listen to me." Christopher leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You are the mother of my children. That alone means I owe you more than I could ever repay. But beyond that, beyond obligation or guilt or whatever you think this is, I care about you, I care about them, and I'm not going to let pride destroy what's left of this family. It's too much. It's not enough." His words came out raw. "Nothing I do will ever be enough to make up for the years I missed, but I have to try. Please, let me try." Amy stared at him, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to refuse, to protect herself, to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard for. But then she thought about Oliver and Emma, about the shelters, about the nights they'd gone to bed hungry, about the exhaustion that never left her bones. "What do you want in return?" she asked quietly. Christopher's expression softened. "I want to be their father. I want to see them, spend time with them, be part of their lives. We can figure out a schedule, whatever you're comfortable with. And if you ever decide you want more than that—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "If you ever want to try again with us, I'll be here. But I'm not making that a condition. I'm doing this because it's right." Tears streamed down Amy's face. "Why? Why are you doing this?" "Because I love them. And because—" He hesitated. "Because I still love you. I never stopped." The words hung in the air between them. Amy wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I don't know if I can love you again, Christopher. I don't know if I can trust you. I know. And I'm not asking you to. Not yet. All I'm asking is that you let me prove myself. Let me show you that I'm here to stay." Amy looked toward the bedroom where her children slept, safe and warm for the first time in months. She thought about Maria's words at the community center. "You can't do it alone." She thought about the years of struggle, the constant fear, the weight of carrying everything by herself, and she thought about Christopher's face when he'd first seen the twins, the raw, overwhelming love in his eyes. "Okay," she whispered. Christopher's eyes widened. "Okay. We'll take the apartment, but—" She held up a hand. "This doesn't mean we're together. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you. This means I'm giving you a chance to be their father. That's all I can promise right now. That's all I'm asking for." Amy nodded slowly. "I want to get a job. A real job. I don't want to just depend on you." "Of course. I can help you." "No." Her voice was firm. "I need to do that part myself. But if you're serious about being in their lives, I'll need help with childcare sometimes. Anytime. I'll rearrange my entire schedule. And I want boundaries. If you're going to be around the kids, I need to know you're not going to disappear when things get hard." Christopher reached across the table, stopping just before touching her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Amy. Ever. I promise you that." Amy pulled her hand back slightly, but her expression had softened. "There's something else," Christopher said quietly. "My father. He's been calling, threatening legal action to get custody of the twins. He thinks he can—" "What?" Amy's voice turned sharp. "He doesn't have any right—" "I know. And I've already contacted my lawyers. He won't get near them, I promise you that." Christopher's jaw tightened. "He destroyed us once. I won't let him do it again." Amy's chest constricted. Will this ever be simple? Probably not. Christopher smiled sadly. But it'll be real, and it'll be worth it. An hour later, Oliver and Emma woke up to pancakes and hot chocolate. They sat at the table, syrup on their faces, giggling at something Christopher said. Amy watched from the doorway, her heart both breaking and healing at the same time. This wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was messier, more complicated, more frightening than any fantasy she'd held on to during those long, lonely years. But it was real, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Christopher caught her eye across the room and smiled, not the practiced smile of a billionaire at a charity gala, but something genuine, vulnerable, hopeful. Amy didn't smile back, not yet. But she didn't look away either, and that for now was a start. 2 weeks later, Amy stood in the doorway of a small apartment in Brooklyn. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with real appliances, windows that let in actual sunlight, a bathroom that didn't require coins to operate. Oliver and Emma ran through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the walls. "This is ours?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "This is ours," Amy confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. Christopher stood behind her, holding boxes of donated furniture and supplies. "Thank you," Amy said quietly without turning around. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She finally looked at him. "Thank you, Christopher, for this, for everything." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "It's a start." "Yeah," Amy whispered. "It is." And for the first time in 4 years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. 2 years later, the morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of a brownstone in Park Slope, casting warm golden light across the breakfast table. Amy stood at the stove, flipping French toast, while humming softly to herself. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in a loose braid. She wore a simple dress and an apron splattered with batter. There were laugh lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. She looked happy. "Mama, Oliver took my crayon," Emma's voice carried from the living room. "Did not, you weren't using it," Oliver shot back. Amy smiled, shaking her head. Some things never changed. "Both of you, come set the table, please," she called out. 2 pairs of feet thundered across the hardwood floor. Oliver and Emma appeared in the doorway, taller now, their faces losing the roundness of toddlerhood. They were 5 years old, starting kindergarten in the fall. "Where's Dad?" Oliver asked, climbing onto a chair. Amy's chest tightened slightly at the word, Dad. It had taken months for the children to call him that, and even longer for Amy to feel comfortable hearing it. "He's picking up your grandmother," Amy said, placing plates in front of them. Emma's eyes lit up. "Grandma Rosa?" "That's right. Rosa," the babysitter who had watched the children that first terrible night, had become family over the past 2 years. She visited every Sunday, bringing homemade empanadas and stories that made the children laugh. The sound of keys in the door made everyone turn. Christopher walked in, his arm around an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes. His mother, Margaret Carter. After Christopher had cut ties with his father, his mother had quietly reached out. The reconciliation had been slow, careful, but genuine. She had apologized for staying silent during the years of his father's manipulation. And she had fallen in love with her grandchildren the moment she met them. "Grandma!" Oliver and Emma leaped from their chairs and ran to her. Margaret laughed, kneeling down to embrace them both. "My darlings, look how much you've grown." Christopher caught Amy's eye across the room. He smiled, that same soft, genuine smile that had slowly won back her trust over the past 2 years. Amy smiled back. It had been a long road. Therapy sessions, difficult conversations, moments of doubt and fear. But they had walked it together, one careful step at a time. 6 months ago, Christopher had asked her to dinner, just the 2 of them. He had been terrified she would say no, but she had said yes. And slowly, carefully, they had begun to rebuild what had been broken. 3 months ago, he had asked her to move into this brownstone with him, a real home, not an apartment he owned, but a place they chose together. Again, she had said yes. They weren't married. Amy wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe she never would be. But they were together, a family, imperfect and still healing, but real. After breakfast, they all went to the park. Oliver and Emma raced ahead, chasing pigeons and climbing on the playground equipment. Margaret sat on a bench nearby, watching them with the contented smile of a grandmother who had found her grandchildren against all odds. Christopher and Amy walked slowly behind, their hands loosely intertwined. "Your mother seems happy," Amy said. "She is." "You make her happy, the kids make her happy." Christopher paused. "You make me happy." Amy looked up at him. You say that a lot now. Because it's true, and because I never want you to doubt it. They stopped walking. Christopher turned to face her, his expression serious. Amy, I know we've talked about taking things slow, and I respect that, but there's something I need to say. Amy's heart quickened. Okay. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting an answer. I just need you to know. He took a breath. You are the strongest, most incredible person I've ever known. You survived things that would have destroyed most people. You kept our children safe when I failed you, and every single day, I'm grateful that you gave me a second chance. Amy's eyes filled with tears. I love you, Christopher continued, his voice thick with emotion. I never stopped loving you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me, that I'm here, that I'm not going anywhere. Amy reached up and cupped his face in her hands. I know, she whispered. I believe you now. You do. I do. She smiled through her tears. And Christopher, I love you too. It took me a long time to admit it, but I do. Christopher's eyes glistened. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. We're going to be okay, he whispered. Yeah, Amy breathed. We are. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the sounds of their children's laughter echoing around them. It hadn't been easy. It had been messy and painful and terrifying, but they had made it through, together. That evening, after the children were asleep, Amy and Christopher sat on the back porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't seen us that night? Amy asked quietly. Christopher was silent for a moment. Every day, we would have survived, Amy said. We always did. I know, but I'm glad I don't have to imagine that world anymore. He took her hand. This is the world I want, right here, with you, with them. Amy leaned her head against his shoulder. Me too, she whispered. And for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Amy felt something she had thought was lost forever. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because they had chosen each other, again and again, through pain and doubt and fear. And that choice, that simple, powerful choice, had changed everything. The end. A message to our viewers. Thank you so much for watching this story unfold. If it touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell so you never miss our next video. Your support means everything to us. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Amy's position, could you have forgiven Christopher? And if you were Christopher, what would you have done differently? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives, and who knows, your answer might inspire our next story. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to fight for the people you love. See you in the next video.